right, welcome to the Borderlines podcast. It is February 7, 2025, and back by request is Martin Levine, pronounced right, third time's the
hmm
charm.
hmm
And some people had mentioned that in our last episode with Martin, recorded almost a year ago on May 14, 2024, towards the end of the episode, Martin said that he didn't think there should be immigration consultants. And I said, okay, that's a whole other topic in of itself. We're going to have a third episode to wrap up the trilogy. Although, of course, there could be more than three episodes. And that here we are. So some people said, hey, where's our third Martin episode? No one's been calling Deanna president of the Treasury Board for a while. We
hmm
need Martin back. So here we are. And Martin, first of all, welcome back
Thank you.
by popular demand. And you have prepared a presentation
That's
on
right.
immigration consultants that actually I haven't seen, but it should be up on it should be visible for YouTube people, and we're gonna walk through it. For those who are viewing on YouTube, you'll be able to see the PowerPoint or the Word document, and we will walk through it for people who are listening on audio. So, Martin,
hmm
we'll hand it over to you.
Okay, when I say presentation, it's a set of notes. Um, I have a long history, or had a long history with immigration consultants, being a visa officer most of my working life. Uh, I'll be upfront. My impression of consultants, immigration consultants, generally is not a good one at all. Um, and that's based on experience. I have known some very ethical immigration consultants, but sadly, they were in the minority. Now, visa officers deal a lot with consultants. I don't know how else to put it, and I don't want to offend consultants who really are good people. I know some of them are, but a lot of them were dishonest or just plain incompetent. Um, I don't know. Well, actually, I do know. Before preparing this presentation, I looked at the recent history of the consultant community. Uh, its earlier history is not at all a happy one, as we know. There's been constant problems with fraudulent behavior, with inadequate governance within the consultant community. Uh, Let me describe to you an incident that sums up my honest feeling about immigration consultants. I was on temporary duty as a visa officer at Seattle, and I had one applicant come before me who had been represented by a consultant. Now, of course, we don't or did not. I guess we still don't allow consultants or lawyers to attend actual interviews. So we went through the interview, and sadly, the applicant failed. And that was towards the end of the working day there at the Consulate General in Seattle. So I put my coat on and went downstairs, and there was a consultant who pounced on me. He literally came right at me. He and his applicant had been waiting in the lobby. I actually had to call the security to get this guy out of my face. And I was from a consultancy in Vancouver that was known to be a very bad one, very dishonest and very fraud positive. Maybe that traumatized me a little bit, but that one experience summarized quite well my general feeling about consultants and the many experiences that I've had with them. Frighteningly, in my point of view, an employee from that same consultant tried to get a job at the Consulate General in Seattle. I was put on the board to consider whether they ought to be selected. And I said, look, this is a dishonest consultant. And if you put this person on, make this person employed at the consulate, in all likelihood, they're going to be a spy and will promote fraud in visa applications. Other people on the board were a little bit naive. I think I eventually got my point across, and they did not hire that person. So consultants were a constant threat to the integrity of our visa processing system. And as I said, we know the consultancy has had a really bad history. It's been a bane to the Department of Citizenship and Immigration. It's been problematic for their applicants by misleading them and taking excessive fees or doing nothing at all for the fees that they were paid. Now, of course, since 2021, we've had the College of Immigration and Citizenship Consultants. I had a look at their website and reviewed a list of their suspended consultants. Clearly, there's still a problem if even they are having to suspend consultants, which I'm sure they're reluctant to do. And then I had a look at the new draft regulations concerning penalizing consultants, and it's evident when they have to do that there's still serious problems. So as much as one would like the College of Immigration and Citizenship Consultants to function better, in my opinion, no, they simply won't. And there's reasons for that that are inherent to the business of being a consultant. There's always going to be problems. Frankly, from my impression of the many consultants that I dealt with, there was no other job that they could take that would make them as much money.
Yeah, I don't want to interrupt, but are you scrolling down on the slides if you've reached the end of the bullet point?
Let me do that. Let me scroll down here.
Just
How about
wasn't
that?
sure if you were still following or yeah.
Is that good?
Yeah, yeah.
Good. The quality of the people just wasn't very good. You had a lot of people who would really, I'm sorry, I don't mean to demean people of different social classes or different origins or people who haven't had the educational opportunities that my dad paid for, but they just weren't very good. There are people almost struggling in the bigger cities of Canada, trying to find an income under the supervision of the head consultant in a given agency, who weren't by and large nice people whatsoever. You saw that in their communications, which were often aggressive and at the point of being hostile and accusatory. Now, nowadays, there's a requirement for a consultant to have a bachelor's degree to take the course. But a bachelor's degree doesn't mean very much in modern day education. So, say for the sake of argument, you have a bachelor's degree in whatever, history or something like that. That doesn't really qualify you to be a consultant. It doesn't teach you the soft skills that you need to be a good consultant. It doesn't teach you the regard for studying immigration as it goes along. The current standard only requires that they do a yearly update, which in my opinion is completely inadequate. You need somebody who's dedicated to subscribing to the right publications, spend some time every day in reviewing them, discusses them with the other consultants if they're in a multi-consultant firm, or to produce uniformity in the approach of that, at least that one consultant. And some of them badly needed more education in their writing skills or even their ability to understand and solve problems. Again, I'm sorry, I know there is exceptions to the rule, but it was very, very consistent. In my opinion, I don't think an online course based on a year or less of study is at all appropriate. I mean, how many years does it take to become a member of the bar in British Columbia? What, 3, 4? You serve an apprenticeship?
Yeah, it's 3 years law school and then 1 year articling. I think that's standard across Canada.
I believe that's the case. I don't know about Quebec, but in
Yeah,
the
true.
common law,
For the common law jurisdictions.
in the common law jurisdictions, as far as I know, that's standard. So you guys in the immigration bar have spent 4 years preparing to do what you do. And a consultant to me is somebody who cuts all the corners, does an online course for God's sake, and then offers to do the same work that you do, simply attracting their customers because their fees are cheaper. And again, without being disrespectful anyway to any ethnic minority in Canada, because they're same ethnicity people, and frankly, frequently they're exploiting the ignorance of some of the people in their own ethnic community, particularly sponsoring families or advocating families who themselves are new in Canada or not very familiar with Canadian standards of doing business, or when they're dealing with members of ethnocultural communities that are still in the home country, and they're very, very naive and don't fully, and again, I'm not demeaning them, but don't come from cultures where receiving honest advice from government officials is at all known. And having lived a lot of the time overseas, there's many cultures where it's inconceivable that if you spoke with a government agent or went to a government website, that the information that you're being given is for your own good or accurate or implementable. So, they're exploiting people who don't have a culture around applying for stuff, when in many cases, if they could be satisfied that they are receiving fair, valuable advice intended for their own good from government officials, consular officials, or by the agencies that are employed by consulates to receive applications, or on government websites. They don't need to pay anybody. A lot of these transactions are fairly straightforward, and I don't want to use a harsh word, but in my opinion, some of the consultants were simply parasites. They're exploiting people who didn't know any better, who could have easily, again, maybe with more multiple language websites in the part of the government of Canada, and a little more access, at least by website, to our consulates overseas or to our, excuse me, processing centers within Canada. They could have done it all on their own. They didn't need an exploitative consultant to do it. Again, this sounds picky, but when you look at the names some of the consultants attached to their agencies, they verge on being ridiculous. They sound like they're talent consultants or something like that. Applying for a visa to Canada is not about some grandiose adventure. It's about satisfying government of Canada and provincial government requirements. So they're pushing people in the wrong direction. As I said, I don't think an online course for a year is at all adequate. I believe that there really should be at least some classroom study, at least so that competent teachers can identify consultants who are struggling or simply don't seem to have the ethical standards to be able to qualify to participate in the occupation. A year is not enough. It's really not enough. Immigration is complex. I would say as a marker, 2 years. And then just like lawyers, an apprenticeship in, well, presumably a consultant firm.
Yeah.
I don't think, again, this is nothing against Queen's University. We're not very far from Queen's here in Ottawa. I know they're a fine university with high standards. I don't see why one Canadian university should have the monopoly in English-speaking Canada on educating consultants. It's just not appropriate. There should be some alternatives available and available locally, certainly in the bigger cities of Canada where most consultants live. There should be alternatives for them to study under different programs that meet federal requirements and the requirements of the new Chamber of Consultants. So I think the system is wrong. And I think in particular, former articles, or call them apprenticeships, and not having a new consultant starting on their own is necessary. It's simply necessary to obtain a quality of consultant work that is adequate for what they're being paid. I'd like to talk a bit, as you can see in my notes, and I'm just going to scroll down a little bit.
If I may, I think that there are a number of issues here. I think the first one is that what is minimally adequate training, and the second one would be regulation of not just consultants but also lawyers once they're up and practicing. And on this subject of training, I would say that some of the issues you're mentioning about consultants do apply to lawyers as well. I think that one of the concerns I've always had about our law school education is that it's very academically driven. And even though
True.
we do have an articling term, there's to some extent I mean, the quality of an article is very varied. A lot of people spend their articles writing memoranda. They're not actually doing practical casework. And so for a lot of people in our professional legal training course, the PLTC, which is what we call it in British Columbia, it's sometimes your first exposure to what actually is involved in the practice of law, aside from just reading cases. So, I mean, I think that like, where is a professional who is working with immigrants and newcomers in this very, very complicated scheme supposed to gain the skills in terms of like how to deal with the clients, how to get informed consent, how to it's just it's all squeezed into a very short piece of time. I know that I don't know if you know much about this, Steve, but how like in Ontario, the Law Society of Upper Canada, you can actually gain a specialization in immigration law. And I always thought that that was a very interesting idea. Like there were certain things that you could do in order to gain that accreditation. And I think that that's an appealing concept where like there
Yeah.
are things that you would need to do in order to be able to be certified to practice in this area, just because the stakes are so high. That just being able to kind of walk out one day after you've got your call to the bar in British Columbia and start practicing in this area, with all that there is to know and like with the stakes being so high, um, it's very daunting. And I think, unfortunately, because of the way that law firms are created, there are not these giant immigration law firms. The idea of having to gain some kind of specialization, the way that you would in the field of medicine, for example, you can't just go and start practicing endocrinology without kind of a practice study. Do you know how it works, Steve? Like how one would go
I
about?
don't know how the certificate works in Ontario. I remember back when I was more involved with the Canadian Bar Association, and there were pushes that, to make statements on consultants, which, I mean, as many people know, like I adopt this from I have a very libertarian perspective of, well, as I've said on the podcast, that my first paper in law school was that I thought law school was an unethical barrier of entry to the profession. So I have an extreme, like, I mean, my take, Martin, is, and I want to get through your slides, and also, and we'll ask questions later. I have a philosophical, very different take, but as far as this certification, I remember there being this tension because the Canadian Bar Association was trying to determine what its position would be regarding consultants. And the Ontario lawyers were saying, well, we should be saying that, it's also a problem because lawyers can dabble in immigration, and there will be many of the same issues that Martin is raising.
Mm-hmm.
And so the initial statement was going to read something to the effect of, people should be going to immigration lawyers who have this certification that they're a specialist in immigration law. And all the lawyers from the other provinces said, well, none of our provinces have that. So the statement had to be watered down a bit. Um, yeah.
This is a question for the lawyers. What causes one to pass your articles? Is it simply a statement for the law firm that the person has behaved adequately and learned enough? Or is there a
No.
qualifying examination or what?
There's a whole bunch. Like, so the articles, your principal needs to say that you fulfilled the components of the article adequately. So you need to have, like, there's a whole checklist of things you need to have accomplished during the period of your articles. You need to have done a simple divorce or participated in a divorce proceeding. You have to have proceeded in some corporate, like, there's, again, these things that need to be accomplished. And then there's the course component, at least in British Columbia, where in British Columbia, I can't remember how long the PLTC course is. It's a couple of months, I think. And during the course of that 1 month, you have to do a mock trial, you have to do a mock interview, you have to do a mock, I think there's 4 assignments.
A
Oh, you have
mock
to write a
contract.
memo, you have to do a mock contract, and then you have to write a series of 4 exams. One that's like on tax and corporate, one that's on family and blah, blah, blah. So it's like super, super intense, and that all carries out. And you can't complete your articles until you've done both the practical component and the bar course, the bar exams.
There's
I think
no
we should,
immigration component to it.
None.
well, I should think, well, again, we're talking about immigration consultants who specifically are meant to be learning about immigration. I think there should be parallel requirements. Like
Yeah, the issue that arises, and I don't want to get too off track on your slides, because I do want to make sure that you get through them. The issue that arises with articles is that it is a mandatory internship where the private sector is essentially asked to do the final year of training.
Hmm.
And as you can imagine, there will be X number of graduates coming out of law school, and the private sector may not have spots for all of those graduates. And you wind up in situations where some people may just never get articles, so they went to law school but may never be able to become lawyers. And you also hear about people who are working in less than ideal situations because there
Hmm.
is that mandatory requirement to it. Um,
Not
so
being paid or not being adequately supervised,
yeah,
somebody's signing off. I mean, they still have to do the exams regardless in the PLTC course or whatever their respective province's course is, but yeah.
so yeah, I hear what you're saying regarding the benefits, obviously, of doing an internship, a mandatory internship at a reputable consulting firm. It's the
Hmm.
logistics of whether there is going to be either like who funds it and are there enough spots for all those people who are graduating.
Well, this is the same issue as why are so many people graduating from law schools when there may be not be enough articling positions? I don't want to be hard on people who want to do immigration consultancy work, but we operate in a free enterprise economy and they should be expected to take the same risk and make choices that are going to impact them about their education than anybody else would. Like, say I spend years becoming an architect. Do I know whether any architectural firm is going to take me on? No, don't know. When you educate yourself, you take a risk.
Mhm.
And there's no reason, in my opinion, for consultants to be exempt from that risk. Not at all.
And your law degree still benefits you, even if you don't become a practicing lawyer. You still, like, there's lots of non-practicing lawyers that will never practice law. But they're, the, in management policy type positions, so yeah, I mean, it's sort of in some ways a test of what the market will bear.
Mhm. Well, here you've mentioned something that I was going to reference later, but I can make a simple statement now and go into detail a bit farther on in my notes. Uh, what is the only advantage of going to a consultant as going to a law firm where they have members that are part of the immigration bar? It's price only. Or if you have an applicant who's not acting in good faith, it's to look for opportunities for somebody who can help you commit various frauds. Beyond that, why have consultants at all? There's no particular reason. They're purporting to provide the same services that lawyers specialized in immigration law are. They're just offering a cheap price. And offering, again, I'm sorry if I sound harsh, offering for a cheap price, you get what you pay for. And help in submitting a visa application is no different from anything else. You get what you pay for. So if you pay on the cheap for a cheap consultant, you're going to get cheap advice about matters that are really, really important to your whole life, whether you get to immigrate to Canada or not, whether you get to get a visitor visa so you can see your grandma before she passes on, all these things. And we're just talking about cheapness.
Yeah, I think there's an act like that cheapness can be rephrased as access to justice though, right? Like
Mm.
Sure.
there definitely is not enough or definitely are not enough immigration lawyers to meet the demand for people
Yeah.
that want assistance. And I don't know what the prices of lawyers would be if there were no consultants
Mm-hmm.
kind
Good
of
point.
kind of controlling and like, not like just adding more supply, right? It's like supply and demand. The if the supply of there's way more consultants, immigration consultants than there are immigration lawyers.
Yeah.
Well,
And just
again,
removing that component of supply, I think I would think would dramatically increase prices.
you're
And
moving
also,
towards the end of my notes. I'm sorry, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, like, I mean, if I were doing a spousal sponsorship and I come from a community that has very specific rituals and ceremonies around marriage, not having to explain it to somebody who's not from that community, from like where I can do it in my first language, it is definitely for me an access to justice thing, and also just the shorthand that you have, like a shared cultural experience, you know, like so you know, there's that comfort, there's that rapport, that I
Well,
think is a real
Language
value
is the
add.
other big one.
100%.
well, does the bar, uh, again, I know diversity strategies are going out of fashion to the south of us, but does the bar of the various provinces need to be more aggressive about diversity and looking to encourage and work with law schools to bring in people from various ethnocultural communities who have the cultural sensitivity and the language knowledge that you're referring to so that they become part of the bar? Should, again,
Probably.
this is a much more general
But
question.
like if we look at and I mean if we look at, say, there was the recent resettlement of Sudanese, and I think about 3,000 have arrived under the recent efforts of resettling Sudanese because of the ethnic cleansing or genocide or whatever going on there. I am not aware of any immigration lawyer who speaks the language in Sudan. I would imagine that there would be immigration consultants who do. And even if the law schools were trying to bring in diversity, it would really like to try to get diversity at that level of nicheness
Hmm.
and somebody who would want to even then turn around and practice immigration law
Yeah,
would
Remember,
be
I'm sorry,
oh no.
third party sources of information about the culture
for
of
sure.
the various ethnocultural groups around the world, and people who can provide language translation services are available.
100%, but they take time. Like when
And
I'm
it's an additional
working,
cost if you're
an additional
hiring that
cost,
translator.
an
Well,
additional
again,
time. We do this all the time, but it's like it means that rather than doing 2 intake interviews, you need 6. And you need to have an interpreter, and you need to have subject matter experts, and you need hours of research. And you know, when you're dealing with clients who are traumatized, you know, like they're not necessarily going to, you don't even always know what you're looking for. And so, yes, you know, they're like, it's just there's a shorthand that that you can have that really it's a major time saver, and not just like in terms of efficiency, but just in terms of making sure you're not missing things. And so I mean, again, that might just be that there's also a way of there being, that's why a lot of lawyers collaborate very
well, this was about
closely
to say.
with consultants, because they have in a lot of situations insights that we would need to spend 20, 30, 40 hours to get to. Yeah,
Because you can get cultural profiles and continue using them. You don't need for every case, for every customer, a new profile. So if you want to learn about Sudanese culture, it is possible to get a sociologist or political scientist to, on a one-time basis, pay only once,
for sure.
to give you an abstract describing certain features of the
Totally.
Sudanese culture. There's more than one, incidentally, but the cultures in Sudan. And why not pool that? And, obviously each lawyer wants a competitive advantage over the other lawyer. In certain circumstances, it's cost efficient for everybody to pool abstracts like that. And furthermore, to pool information about available translators who are reliable. Now, currently consultants, you don't know what the hell is being said. And a consultant who does not speak the heritage language or the working language of an applicant can employ somebody off the street to do the translating. And we know from experience that often the translations are wildly wrong. Often the third person off the street is giving their own immigration advice with no sanctions whatsoever. These are doable things if the immigration bar wants to take it up. So I guess I should move on. Is it okay if I move on and then we
Of
can
course, yeah.
recover?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. these are my proposals. Any perspective, and stop me if these measures are already in place.
Yeah.
In
Well,
my
right now it's
opinion,
oh, these are the bars to being a consultant.
yes.
Yeah.
In my
Okay.
opinion, any prospective consultant who has an indictable offense or has admitted done an admission that would be an indictable offense should never be allowed to practice as a consultant. A prospective consultant who has been convicted of tax fraud should never be allowed to practice, even if the penalty was an administrative one and not a criminal one. A prospective consultant who has violated provincial labor laws or practiced any licensed profession without a license, including, for example, selling real estate, something as mundane as that, should never be allowed to practice because they're not reliable people. And consultants, to avoid conflicts of interest, consultants should be barred from occupations such as being a real estate agent, overseas labor recruiter, engaging in lending and mortgages, political lobbying. They should not be allowed to do both at the same time. Simply, it'd be a condition of being a consultant that you sign that you will not engage in any other of these activities which could put you in a conflict of interest. So forever is whatever it's worth. And again, please let me know if it's already been done in some cases. I'm just scrolling my notes down here. In terms of restrictions on consultant activity, I would not allow registered consultants to operate outside of Canada. They're simply too difficult to control. You don't know what they're up to. And either the federal or the provincial government should insist that consultants have a high level of liability insurance and post a bond. A bond sufficient enough, for example, to repay a customer if they've been given patently wrong advice and suffered from it, and so that they can go and then get themselves a member of the immigration bar to represent themselves properly. Now, yeah, moving on to the crux of my argument. I don't think consultants should exist. As I said, the occupation has a very poor track record. They're a constant problem to police. And again, we see in these new regulations provisions to police them. So what does that tell us? It means that there's still problems in policing them. Now the new regulations have provisions for the citizenship officers to investigate them. Who's going to pay for that? Who's going to pay? These are government bureaucrats. Who's going to pay for all of this? Is the general taxpayer meant to carry the load of having citizenship officers become police with the power to raid places, maybe issue warrants? I don't know what entirely is comprised. And as I was alluding to earlier, there's always a risk of a conflict of interest. Consultants don't normally, unless they're very dishonest, earn the fees that lawyers do. Simply by the nature of Canada's demographics and where people immigrate to, some of them, certainly in British Columbia, operate in very high-cost urban environment. And in a way, they have the same possibility that us visa officers do. After a few years of consultancy, what other options does a consultant who may not have a very sophisticated educational record or previous experience do? What can they do? It's say visa officers, we say we became trapped because the skills and experience that we learned as visa officers were not readily transferable to any other occupation. Now, I know it's a limited kind of comparison, but a lawyer can shift to other types of laws if they're really just not into doing immigration and work. And as you said, Stephen, or I'm sorry, as Deanna said, a lawyer who doesn't want to or really doesn't feel fit to practice law does have opportunities to do other things. So, you know, it's not a total loss. So they spent those years getting a law degree and doing the apprenticeship. Again, I'm focusing on ethnicity. I'm sorry to do that, but I worked overseas in high fraud environments, and I had to see the results of that when consultants contacted us. Unfortunately and sadly, and not everybody, but there are consultants who prey on their own ethnicity. Frankly, a lot of them in my experience. They know that they're dealing with an unsophisticated constituency in the home country or amongst the family or prospective employers in Canada, and they prey on them. They give inadequate work, or they counsel to fraud, or it may not even be deliberate fraud on the part of the applicant. But again, they come from cultures where they don't have the same legal standards, there's the same concept of honesty in transactions with the government as we do. I'm not criticizing them for that. That's how you survive. I saw it myself in a place like India, the Philippines, but you can't break that. I mean, they are an unsophisticated clientele that are regularly cheated, and I saw it myself. In my opinion, and call me jaundiced or call me cynical, but in my opinion, immigration consultants partially exist for political reasons on the part of politicians who want to please certain ethnic groups, not necessarily the whole ethnic group in any given community in Canada, but the movers and shakers in that ethnic group who may themselves be involved with immigration consultants and be making money off of them. It's simply a reality. And trying to police that is nearly impossible. Speaking as a member of an ethnic minority, I don't like to rat out my own ethnic group. And I understand why people in any other ethnic group feels reluctant to tell on people of their own ethnicity. It feels really bad. And then you may face reprisals from within your own community. In terms of the reputable consultants that I've met, and there are some that I have great regard for, totally honest and did everything they could to serve their clients. These are by and large intelligent, educated, and hardworking people, don't cut corners, and could easily obtain well-paid employment in other fields. They have transferable skills, they have soft skills, they're organized, they know how to conduct business, they could be very gainfully employed in other occupations. So I would not say that by eliminating the occupation consultant, you would impose harsh penalties upon them. Now, I hadn't originally meant to refer to this, but because it's become such an issue in the past few weeks, the Americans are pressing us really hard on our immigration practices. That's something relatively new for us because most Americans pay no attention to Canada, nor their politicians, but the Trump administration has made it a cause célèbre to focus on our inadequacies in Canada, on admitting people who may pose a threat to the United States, may try to cross the border illegally. Consultants make it easy to wound us. I mean, if an American really wanted to, a really hardcore conservative American wanted to do a real study of us and the things that Canadians do wrong and invalidate Canada's reasons for existence, they could say, what are you allowing those consultants to do that for? Why do you have these people? We know they're counseling to fraud. We know they're facilitating the admission of people who are going to go walk right across the border, at least damage our labor market, and maybe a threat to American national security. We don't want to incite that type of attention at this time from Americans who dislike Canada's existence and are looking for flaws in anything that we do. It shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way. They shouldn't be attacking us like that. Who's going to stop them? Who's going to stop in the next 4 years the Republican Party and American conservatives in general looking for our faults? I think, and I say this in the best of conscience and from experience, it would be better to say to applicants and to the Americans for that matter, that somebody who wishes to come to Canada and wants representation can only be represented by a Canadian lawyer admitted to the bar of their province and who are based in Canada, who are practicing in Canada, where if they do something wrong, it's a lot easier to catch them. We can say to the applicants, and that makes it clear in their minds, so some guy in Punjab or in Manila is coming to you and saying, well, I'm a consultant or I represent a consultant, and we can get you into Canada really quickly. What we say back to the applicants and to the Americans is that, no, you won't. We can put it out in every communication that we try to make with the immigration application community, people who want to employ them, and ethnocultural groups in Canada, that if you employ a consultant It doesn't matter whether they're used to be a registered consultant or they're a ghost consultant. We catch you employing one, your application is done. You're going to be automatically refused. And we could take that to the Americans and say, see, you had a concern. We took it very seriously and we've taken this radical step. I think it would be good for everybody concerned, including the applicants, because then they would have access, if they wish to pay for it, to a fully qualified Canadian lawyer who is receiving constant updates about changes in immigration law, regulations, and policy, maybe supervised by senior partners in their firm, and can provide the services that an applicant should be entitled to. Another point out about consultants, AI is advancing even more quickly than people like me, like real committed AI nerds, ever imagined. Really, it's getting to the point where AI could do some of the work that consultants are doing. It might have to be multilingual, but you could have AI answering questions about immigration and getting Canadian visas that people in these various communities or their families in Canada have. You could have them talking online to an AI and answering the questions they're not sure about and getting reliable answers that are based on uploading into the AI's database every possible bit of information about immigration law, about provincial nominee programs, about changes in regulations, about everything, and about the way visa offices and the processing centers process, what the timelines should be, and what to look out for if you feel that your application or your family member's application or your prospective employer's application has gone wrong. AI can do it. We don't need consultants anymore to do that type of thing. And put to you the point, in what other type of law is there a provision for lower skilled, less qualified consultants? Can correct me, I don't know about British Columbia very well, but is there such a thing as an engineering consultant with lesser training and skills?
Well, so it's on this specific question, it depends on how broadly you interpret the practice of law, right? Like some lawyers, tax lawyers would chafe that almost all accountants are giving tax law advice without a law degree. And you can almost run that down to like the person you buy groceries explaining what the law is regarding refunds or consumer protection. So, I mean, HR, human resources giving advice regarding how the Employment Standards Act works. And so actually one of the questions
Notaries
that
with
I
real
had
estate
was
transactions.
whether your concerns about consultants, like what are your thoughts on the regulated international student immigration advisor system? So the
I
whole
don't,
so the whole premise behind consultants, right, is that it's illegal to give immigration advice without either being a member of a law society or a consultant. And when the provisions came in, one of the tensions that emerged was all of the universities have international student advisors, right, for helping people with postgraduate work permits, questions about co-op. And the question just became, okay, what do you do with like all of the international student departments? And
okay,
that's where the RISIA came in.
okay, there's an issue here in that our laws and regulations only refer to consultancy for pay.
Hmm.
Now, unless the international student advisor is charging the student, or maybe depending on how you interpret pay, is charging a fee to the university or college for giving this advice, they're exempt from the law because they're not taking any money for it. I
Well, no, but
don't
they're
know.
all regulated. So there would have been that way to interpret it, but the way that it came down was they all go through they're called regulated international student immigration advisors, also regulated by the college.
Uh, uh, well, you've taken me on to another point that I wanted to make, and this again is almost a question to the immigration bar in British Columbia or anywhere else in Canada. Would firms that specialize in immigration law be willing to accept these people as on staff under supervision when necessary of a practicing lawyer? Uh, would practicing lawyers look for situations where a student advisor is overstepping and giving legal advice that in the province concerned has to be given by a member of the bar. And I'm also going to explain another advantage for, and we talked about this already, say for the sake of argument, and this really brings me to the final part of my notes. Say for the sake of argument, immigration consultancy, registered immigration consultants could be eliminated. Now you're going to pick up business. In exchange for picking up that business, would you be prepared to go that far? If somebody said to you, no more immigration consultants, even if they're registered in the province of British Columbia, we're completely taking away all that competition from you, what would the British Columbia Immigration Bar be prepared to do in order for that very great advantage? Would they be willing to take on advisors working under the supervision of lawyers who would give advice at an appropriate level, make sure they stick within an appropriate level and can be relied on to refer any legal questions to a lawyer in the firm so that the lawyer can deal with it? Would you be prepared, for example, to be a bit more flexible? Well, I know some lawyers already work at a flat rate, to offer a flat rate to prospective applicants who don't necessarily have money for like $150 an hour legal fees. Would you commit to a fee for service basis at a lesser amount for certain clients who you know to have rather simpler immigration needs? So somebody who feels that they need a lawyer to proceed with their application to be a sponsored family member to Canada. That's not complex law by the most part. I know there's exceptional cases, but you're not talking about complex law, or frankly, anything that a literate applicant who receives the information in their own language couldn't understand and do on their own. But for those simple type of services, would you be prepared to offer reduced rate? Maybe by employing people who had been immigration consultants as paralegal workers.
But like, I guess if just going back to like the supply and demand, it's if supply went down like that, isn't the opposite what will be more likely to happen? That there will be way less people offering competitive rates, and so prices will go up. Like I
Well,
think part of the issue, so I pulled up the stats, like you mentioned the Americans, on lawyers per the amount of lawyers in the population. And this is based on the AI overview that Google provides when you search for things now. So this numbers might not be fully accurate, but we'll just assume for the sake of this that the AI is right. So it says that in January 1, 2024, there's about 4 lawyers for every 1,000 people in the United States. And in the same period in Canada, it's around 1 lawyer per about 1,800, with like Ontario being one of the higher amounts of lawyers at 1 lawyer per 1,498. And so I don't think there are enough lawyers to fully make that comparison, like to that if the
well,
consultants
remember
were
one
gone, that
thing.
there would be enough lawyers to meet the
Correct
demand.
me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that in some American states, you don't even need a law degree to practice law. They don't have the professional standards that
Well, I
we
think
do.
it's New York. I think you need, yeah, in New York, I don't think you need a law degree to write the bar there.
Well, what does that say about being a lawyer in America? So you don't have a law degree. You never went to a university and studied for 3 years.
Oh, you're getting to my first paper in law school about how I
Well,
think it's, yeah,
I don't
like
want to
this
intrude
was my
upon.
paper that I thought I like, and I may have maybe moderated a bit, but I think being that law school isn't, or at least I thought that law school was an unethical barrier of entry to practicing law in New York State. If it still is the case that you don't need a law degree to write the bar, is an
I don't
example of
think
that.
it's the only state with that. Yeah.
Yeah,
That seems to undermine the entire premise of the show Suits. But anyways, I digress.
So again, without being a rabbit-free enterprise, the market or an economist, I'm not claiming to have economist level skills, but the market can take care of such things. When immigration consultants who don't practice as a paralegal in a law firm are eliminated, there's going to be a lot more business for graduating lawyers. There's going to be more availability of articles where they can specialize in immigration law, and more ongoing opportunities in law firms. And again, I have to say again, with AI taking so much of a prominent role in giving advice in our society, a lot of the things that consultants do really aren't necessary. An ethical lawyer might even want to say that to somebody who approaches them, that, look, I can charge you, like, I'll give you a rate. I'll only charge you $90 an hour instead of 150. But in good conscience, I have to tell you that if you go to this website, you can do it and get the information you need and submit an application without paying a fee to anything other than the government of Canada. It'll balance out. It may take a little while, but I don't think it's going to take that long. And then you would have a balanced situation where applicants who really, really need or feel they need somebody to back them up are getting the best quality legal advice that the bar in Canada can provide to them without wasting resources on supervising consultants and distractions like that, and consultants confusing applicants by pretending to be as qualified as members of the bar. And if they're doing it overseas, you've got no way to check on it. I just think the market would take care of it with a great boost in the quality of services to applicants.
So on the comment of the market taking care of it, what about the other end, which is, should you need a license to represent someone for consideration at all? Like, should that just be open that anybody can represent anybody for
That's not the
consideration?
Canadian way of doing things. If I want to get a building plan approved by the city of Ottawa, I can't just employ somebody off the street to say, yeah, I had a good look at it, and I'm sure this building won't fall down and it meets all the bylaw standards. Canada is a developed country based very heavily on expertise, something the Americans don't always get when they talk about us. We back up what we do as Canadians and as people who provide various sorts of services to Canadians with standards.
I have to agree with that. Yeah, I mean, I think that to answer the question that you asked previously, I think that there are many immigration law firms that employ paralegals in precisely the way that you've mentioned. Some also employ consultants in precisely the way that you've mentioned. The thing about it is that the effort of supervising that work in a substantive way, it's hugely time consuming as well. And so it's not like, you know, the burden of, I mean, it sounds kind of silly, but the burden of mentorship and supervision, it's a huge time burden, right? And so we do it because, you know, because of our interest in developing the profession and all of this sort of thing, but it's not like, okay, kerplunk, there you go. Now we are just carrying on, because like, if you're actually committed to the integrity of the product that's coming out of your firm, you're looking at every single submission, and you know, you want to make sure that what's coming out of your firm is reaching those standards that you've mentioned. I think you've raised a lot of very interesting questions here. I've always been very much of the view that Steve has mentioned about like, more people offering the services at a lower rate means greater access to justice. I fully understand what you're saying about the vulnerability of the applicant and about the harm kind of being absorbed by people who are underrepresented or even defrauded. This is a problem that troubles me, and I do take a lot of cases where, you know, things have gone terribly awry. And I think part of the tension for me is that for immigration, the sins of the representative are directly imputed to the applicant. So to me, that is part of the issue. And I understand that for the department, it's like there's just too much difficulty in terms of like the labor of establishing who does the blame lie with. But to me, that is an overly simplistic way of looking at it, because sometimes even when there's absolutely clear evidence like of the fraud, you know, it's very difficult to prove. And I think that this newest move to regulate, IRCC stepping in to regulate, I have concerns that it's going to prevent not just consultants, not just bad consultants, but good consultants and good lawyers to have to really be afraid to provide good advice because they're working under this fear. I am assuming this is the regulations you're talking about, because of a fear that they will be seen to have counseled misrepresentation.
Well,
I can give an example here. Like, do I need to disclose that when I was 15 years old, I drank underage? Do I need to disclose that when I cross a port of entry? And I might say in good conscience, you know what? I don't think you need to disclose that. Is that a misrepresentation? Is it not? Am I then going to have to tell every client that every sin they think that they might have committed, that they're going to go into the confessional at the port of entry and, give is that good legal advice? Am I doing that now in a self-serving way because I'm afraid of my own liability, and so what happened to client solicitor privilege? What happened to all of these principles? So again, I feel like things have gone amok. I don't think that IRCC should be our professional regulator. I
no,
think
I agree.
is
I agree completely. They don't have the
yeah, I think
expertise.
that yeah,
Well, so there's three components to the recent regulations that are under consultation. There's setting up a bond, which you mentioned, Martin, that there should be a fund that people who are the victims of bad advice have access to. So there's the setting up of a fund. My understanding is there was previously a fund under one of the previously regulatory bodies, and it wasn't that effective, but I don't know the details. There's
I understand that we're
the
supposed to be under the current regulator, but it's just empty. That
Well, no,
again,
but that's the new regs are to create it.
I see.
So maybe they intended it and they're now bringing it in. There's the fining of lawyers and consultants for counseling misrepresentation, which we'll probably have to do a whole separate episode on like
Sure.
specific concerns to kind of extract and elaborate on what Deanna was referring to, because I understand that on its face, people can say, well, what's the problem? We're counseling misrep. That's obviously something that should have consequences.
Mhm.
And the fining, same thing, administrative monetary penalty for ghost consultants.
Well,
One of the questions that I have though is you mentioned that 1 year of schooling to be a consultant is not sufficient. And one of the counter arguments that both I think a lot of consultants and I would also kind of just have, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, is that 1 year of dedicated consulting education is arguably more valuable than 3 years
Yeah.
of legal training in unrelated areas of law.
I'm
So
not
do
sure
you
I
think that
agree.
there should also be like an obligation on lawyers to where would should being having a law degree in of itself be sufficient if you can go through law school without taking a single course on immigration law? And the course that they do is pretty, there's nothing comparable to the direct practical applications of what you learn in the consulting course.
Sure.
Uh,
Are lawyers getting sufficient education to represent people?
So more generally, when we talk about professional groups having to mentor and bring new entrants to the profession along, this is a burden that Canada and the provinces place on licensed professions. I can understand why law firms resent it or find difficulty in working the cost into their fee schedule, but this is again Canada. That is what we expect from all the professions. So a major architectural firm in Vancouver has to take on a new graduate. Well, it's going to cost them. That new graduate will have to be mentored. Uh, it shouldn't be any different for the immigration bar. There's a cost. There's a cost. But again, if freestanding consultants are eliminated, you're also being offered a very substantial compensation for accepting the cost of doing your mentoring. Uh, I just want to complete the last couple of points on my notes. Would lawyers be prepared, and this is relevant, would lawyers be prepared to offer a flat rate to retainer rate to universities and public colleges who want to recruit, who are employing advisors who may not be the best, or serving counseling situations to their advisors? The flat rate per annum, having already paid for it. So the advisor, Simon Fraser, feels free to pick up the phone and call you guys and say, a question was put to me and I'm not sure how to answer it. And also in terms of who gets services, which applicants have access to services, again, I shudder to say to a lawyer, but there is sometimes a role for pro bono lawyer immigration services. I mean, lawyers should, as people, as educated people, as sophisticated people, be prepared to exercise compassion. And there are cases where an applicant who's not a bad person, who wants to comply with the law, who has a poor background, no resources, either overseas or in Canada, cannot pay for anything. I think there's a role for common decency and common compassion. Again, limited because lawyers are in business to make money, to do it, to provide pro bono services.
Yeah. I would say on
How
this one, most lawyers in the immigration field, I would say, and I don't think I'm exaggerating, work predominantly on flat fee retainers in general. Again, there are always exceptions to this rule, but I don't know many immigration lawyers that don't work predominantly on flat fee retainers. In terms of pro bono, again, I don't know many that aren't doing some degree of pro bono work, but I love the idea, and I think there's a cohort of lawyers who have advocated for this for some time, that like there should be mandatory pro bono requirements. Right now, the Law Society asks us if we've engaged in pro bono, but there's no actual requirement that we do so.
Well,
But
before
I
the
But
government,
Martin, let's say that the answer from the bar kind of collectively was we don't want to hire people to do these flat rates. We're not prepared to offer a flat retainer rate to public colleges, and we aren't interested in increasing pro bono immigration services.
mm,
Would it change your mind on whether there is a role for consultants, or kind of where does that leave things?
no, because a cheap inferior service cannot replace what a lawyer who has 4 years of study and training can give to the applicant. I don't think in any given province you'd find everyone right across the entire provincial bar saying, no, 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 we won't compromise on fees. Like my dad was a commercial real estate appraiser, and sometimes in the interest of getting business, you compromise on fees, you offered a lower rate, you consider what your potential client could offer and adjusted your fees to make it feasible for them to use your services. Uh, I don't think rigid behavior on the part of immigration lawyers should be an excuse to keep consultants in business. It's
I'd
simply
say one
not.
other thing though, I feel like there's also got to be some accountability on the behalf of the department, the
Mhm.
systems. You said earlier that there were some things that there should be no need for a representative. I'm not sure that I agree with that in pretty much anything right now. The systems are so convoluted that the simplest mistake can have grave mistakes. And I am like the banner, like the poster child, as is Steve, I think, for access to justice. But the systems are so convoluted right now. And so I
Uh,
think that it feels disingenuous for the department to be saying you don't need a consultant or a representative, and yet the smallest mistake you might make might close down opportunities for the rest of your life.
I agree with you completely. And I would say that as mean as visa officers are meant to be, most of us did understand the concept of an honest mistake or an irrelevancy or an applicant being confused and without any mean reason to mislead, without any desire to mislead, gave an inappropriate answer. The problem is communicating that to the senior ranks of IRCC and saying, look, we're not a punitive agency, we're a facilitative agency that seeks to bring into Canada immigrants and visitors who can offer the citizens and permanent residents of Canada a benefit. That mentality is not there right now. So I
No,
agree with
God,
you.
no.
It's
No,
completely
I
not
think you would
there.
be shocked to see the types of stuff we're seeing in terms of the lack of facilitation.
Yeah, it really is a very serious gap in the system. Uh, but say, for example, in terms of firms being reluctant to cut fees, what if you pool all of pro bono requests in British
I guess
Columbia?
like the question would like why? So there's again, this is all Google AI. There's 13,000 apparently licensed consultants in Canada, which seems high, but that I guess that's the number. I don't know how many are full time. There's
13,000.
113,000. There's 136,000 lawyers in Canada. a very small amount practice immigration, obviously, of that 136,000. If you remove that 13,000, I just don't see why the inevitable result would be lawyers being able to increase their fees due to less competition, the same way any other monopoly would work. And then in this case, just a vast number of people who can't afford the new fees.
I don't think there's any reason to fear that. So, I mean, I'm conscious of talking, I know the British Columbia Immigration Bar exists all across the province, but I'm conscious I'm speaking to some members of the bar that are in Vancouver, which is a ridiculously high cost environment. Uh, what about a consultant or a lawyer, not just necessarily a immigration lawyer? Well, maybe a lawyer with uh, sufficient immigration knowledge or access to it, who's sitting, say, in Kamloops or Prince George or Nanaimo, and isn't paying through the nose to have a ridiculously expensive office in a strip mall. Why wouldn't they consider lowering their fees a little bit to bring in business?
Oh, I think that happens now. It's just,
Sure.
would the removal of competition contribute to that? Or if all the inquiries that are going to the person, to the lawyer that previously would have gone to a consultant, it seems like either the lawyer could, like, it just seems like in those situations, that's, supply and demand, price would go up.
Yeah. And
I
just
don't
like
think so.
the amount of time and effort that goes into doing an application well, just a business model that is sustainable. We've been at this, Steve and I, for quite some time now, and just the effort that goes into having a viable business model, it's a lot. I think
Well,
every immigration lawyer right now is like, oh my God, how do we do this?
well, this is a sensitive question, I know, particularly for the bigger immigration law firms. How much are you paying a new immigration lawyer? The person's passed their articles and they want to work now. Are you paying them top dollar the way you are paying the partners in your firm? No, you're not. In terms of increasing the cost to immigration firms and making them want to raise their fees to reflect a supposed scarcity and demand for their services, I don't think it washes. Because not every lawyer in British Columbia or anywhere in Canada is being paid anything near top dollar. Younger lawyers certainly are not being paid top dollar. You might find lawyers who are struggling to find work, who might say, yeah, just pay me like $45 an hour for a year or two. Let me work on those immigration cases. I'll try to exercise my best judgment and not bothering partners in the firm, except when something's very complex. And then there may be a reason to tell the applicant that we would have to increase our fees to provide the necessary services. I don't buy it. I
But
think,
isn't that kind
again,
of like the point though? Like, as you say, like, are the firms paying top dollar out of the goodness of their heart? No. So if competition were removed, why would they lower their
because
prices on the?
there's plenty of immigration lawyers, in British Columbia and elsewhere in Canada. Uh, there's room for people to pick and choose. There's a market. Uh, and even in a situation where the supply of immigration lawyer services is limited, market rules still refer. Uh, some applicants may choose not to employ a representative, or they may choose to employ a representative who is not charging them and take the consequences for doing that. And again, because they're not providing paid advice, they're beyond the scope of Canada's immigration laws and regulations. They would make provision. Now, here's again, I know this may sound inflammatory to members of the bar in any given province, but at the federal level, our immigration laws and regulations are all the same. Lawyers in one province, immigration lawyers in one province, may be maxed out in terms of the work that they do. But what about slower provinces? What about the Saskatchewans and the New Brunswicks and the Manitobas of Canada? If it's simply a federal application, in fairness, that work, and right now that we're talking about stopping interprovincial trade barriers, what is
Yeah.
the reason for having interprovincial trade barriers for providing advice on immigration law on matters that are strictly under the scope of federal law, which applies from one coast to the other?
Well, there's an issue with provincial nomination programs, and whether a BC lawyer, for example, is without registering on Ontario, how many hours they can spend doing Ontario law and blah,
That
blah, blah.
issue,
But like, so is would you, would it, do you think that what you're proposing requires an increase in the number of lawyers? Like,
uh,
is that kind of contingent on, okay, we can abolish the consulting professioncy, but there needs to be an increase in the number of lawyers to increase to meet the demand?
you'd have to tell me how many law students got their law degrees and have articled are still looking for work.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, we don't know, but I think there's quite a few of them from what I'm told. Uh, Canada has for some years, according to your own profession, experienced an excess number of graduates in law. And that's led to problems in students finding articles. What if you open it up?
Yeah. I would just, I guess like from the business perspective, I think my experience has been, and I think that others have said this as well, it's a full year before you can expect a new lawyer to even break even, let alone make money.
So you're not paying them much.
No, it's not about that. It's that, like, I think that they need to be paid a living wage regardless, because otherwise, like, quality of life is bad and quality of work is therefore bad. But you pay them but they operate at a loss just because the learning curve is huge. I don't believe that law school education adequately equips somebody to actually begin practicing law. And
Well,
so
let me,
to me, that is that is just as a business, maybe it's 1 year, maybe it's 2. And so it's a huge investment for any business to bring on somebody and to get them up to speed. And it's something that we all do because, this is for the development and succession planning and all of this kind of stuff, and to have that support, but it's by no means an easy undertaking from a business
I'm,
change.
I'm not suggesting as it is, but although some people complain about lawyers, basically they're a highly regarded, highly trusted profession in Canada. If I was in some legal trouble, when I say, oh, that lawyer is going to make money off of me, and I don't know, no, I'm going to go begging to the lawyer for help. We'll talk about the fees. I hope the lawyer will be a little bit respectful of what I can pay. But once that is arranged, I know I can trust that lawyer almost implicitly because the immigration bar and provincial laws are sufficient to clean out most of the malpracticing lawyers. So you get a lot of professional recognition, a lot of deference for what you do in exchange for having competition eliminated. I think it's reasonable to ask the immigration firms, and they should be pooling their opportunities for new lawyers. Maybe across Canada, in certain types of law, they're primarily referring to federal statute, not provincial statute, which of course require special provincial experience. In my opinion, the immigration bar should be taking this up.
When you were a visa officer, what was the perception of lawyers? You mentioned that consultants was negative, one accosted you. What was the perception of lawyers?
It depended on what experiences you had. Now, again, I started very early when the immigration bar was in its infancy. I don't want to mention any lawyers not long ago, a period. Some of them were not as professional as you would expect now, but that was a long time ago. The immigration bar has expanded enormously from the late 1970s, and the public is much more aware of immigration issues. So I think most of us, particularly those of us who had not had negative experiences at the start of the immigration bar in the 1970s, we had high regard for lawyers and their training. We saw ethical behavior on the part of lawyers, responsible behavior. We did not question lawyers about, we had no authority, but we did not say to lawyers, well, you're charging too much or something like that. We hoped that lawyers would be reasonable in terms of what they charge for the services. We did hope, some of us, that flat rate would become the rule for retainers and maybe even for applicants who saw themselves needing help down the line, maybe with a citizenship application or opening a business in Canada or things of that kind, or seeking recognition for their own profession. We had good regard for the immigration bar and the lawyers in it. In the latter part of my career, I could cite you very few examples of an immigration lawyer misbehaving or prejudicing the applications of their clients by being simply rude in their interactions or non-factual or accusatory in their interactions with visa officers. They observed professional courtesy. They were straightforward, and they got the job done. Purely and simply, they got an adequate job done. We would look at a lawyer-assisted application and say, that I don't know if the dog agrees with me.
That's just Deanna. She's barking her disagreements.
Oh, okay. Well, I respect your point of view. Often dogs are smarter than people, but we felt that the lawyers are doing a good job, and by doing that, they were saving us a lot of grief, because political representations are a big part of what visa officers have to put up with. I think in the processing centers, they may have been more sheltered from the politicians, but we were not. So we get issues where earlier in the profession, politicians would leap in to try to protect legal work that was not ethical or not appropriate, but we don't see it anymore. The role of the politicians' representations is not what there used to be, partly because applicants are getting top quality legal advice from the immigration bar. And for that respect that you receive, even from visa officers, and for the opportunities that you would gain by having freestanding immigration consultants put out of business and immigration work that still needs to be done by a representative, return where it should be to you, members of the immigration bar, I think you should leap at it. I think in the long, it may take a few years of adjustment, certainly, but I think in the long
Oh, there are
run,
definitely lawyers. I mean, the CBA's position is that immigration consultants should only be allowed to work for lawyers.
I agree.
I have my philosophical,
I'm sorry,
and
go ahead.
I just don't see the, like, I mean, we're going to wind up agreeing to disagree on the
I
cost
think
thing
we
because
are.
I don't, I just don't see, I mean, I think there'd be an explosion of unauthorized representatives.
But if you say to, again, as I said, if you say to applicants, don't you dare, don't you dare, or else even if your application has no fatal flaws in it, you're going to be refused. You have to get that don't you dare message out. It would also help to get it out to the Americans that we're taking their concerns with the utmost seriousness. That works out. You say don't you dare enough times and it's going to work. A lot better than the existing system, where now they've had to pass regulations that are going to involve expenditures of taxpayers' money to police consultants who are meant to be ethical when they're still not. Like, lawyers have an overarching responsibility, an ethical and professional responsibility to do whatever they can to safeguard law in Canada. They ought to accept that they're required to be ethical, and there are standards for that. I'd extend that they have a responsibility for the deference that they get and for the sometimes high fees that they get. Certainly for senior lawyers in an immigration law firm. Look, I respect everybody's desire to make a buck, but they're getting paid pretty well. I think in exchange for that, the immigration firms should take it on and should be prepared to pool business for applicants who are not all that well funded, and maybe direct it to lawyers who feel themselves are a little bit underemployed or have additional resources to deal with it. But don't be greedy. Let immigration lawyers, maybe in the smaller cities or new to the field, let them get some work. Don't be greedy. Let them get some work too.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
I
that,
think,
yeah, go
Deanna,
ahead.
go ahead.
Well, I didn't hear the answer, Ruby, ensure that I did not hear the beginning of the answer to your last question. My pup does not like when the post arrives, but I think you've raised a lot of interesting questions today. Honestly, I think I think we will agree to disagree on certain points, but I appreciate your raising some of these questions. It's definitely a very interesting conversation, and I think that there's no doubt that there are a lot of kind of bad actors out in the field. I'm loath to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I feel like the interests of access to justice is real. And I'm just not sure what is the appropriate way to kind of to hit that balance.
No,
Well,
no, I
from
think agreeing to disagree is like perfectly fine. I think we know where, like, I think I understand what I understand what you're saying and your position, and it's you're you have a higher expectation and faith that the legal community would respond in the way that you're hoping they would to the lack of competition than I do. And fortunately, there's no real way to test the hypothesis.
there's no
Um,
baseline there that
yeah,
you
there's no
can compare
baseline. There's no
against.
way
No.
to like, definitively say which ones,
Yeah.
which would be more likely to happen.
And I think what we see now is that there's a smaller cohort of lawyers that are doing like bare break even practice, doing a lot of legal aid work, a lot of pro bono work, and a lot of things off the side of their desk. And but again, it's not it's about sharing the burden kind of, and also like of getting um a larger cohort of people trained up. And that is a significant initiative, not just something that can happen overnight. It's
Well,
like,
Yeah. And it's going to go actually, I think, in the opposite way. The federal court is released like kind of a proposal paper which says that since so many consultants are ghosting judicial reviews, they may as well just start letting them appear.
hmm.
Um, and we'll see how that goes.
yeah.
Well, having dealt with consultants, I wouldn't want them to appear in front of me.
Well,
There's
it
an
might
extra level of
might
training
shine
now
a
that
light.
they need for the IRB. There's a whole like
Uh,
additional layer of education and everything that
I
is
wouldn't want to
required for the
bother with them.
IRB.
Essentially, the IRB is very limited time and limited resources. You don't want to fill that up with allowing consultants to appear. No, the law's the law. The law, Canada, again, it's not America here. Again, I don't want to sound like somebody who's terrified of Donald Trump, but we're not America. We believe in laws, we believe in regulations, we believe in standards, we believe in order, we believe in the old constitutional
But when
argument.
we become the 51st state, how will that change? Not just like the
I, I shudder to think about it, but I spent time in America
Seattle,
quite a
you
bit of
said.
it
Yeah.
and had temporary duties in America. I like YouTube a lot, and I look at YouTube videos where the police in Florida are arresting very attractive women who have committed DUIs. Do I love the palm trees waving in the distance, particularly when it's 18 below out here in Ottawa? Yeah. Do I want anything like that in terms of enforcement of the law or the way Americans act towards law officers who are just trying to do their duty in most cases? No, I don't want their culture around anything in Canada. I don't want it. And it's our duty as Canadians to reinforce and always guard the regulation bound, law bound, ethics bound, and in some cases restrictive nature of Canada as a culture. You're part
Interesting.
of that. You benefit from that.
Yeah.
On that note, I don't think this will end with a trilogy. We'll have to
No,
have you back on.
Yeah.
look
Um,
forward to it. Definitely.
yeah, this has been fun.
Yeah, definitely.
Really too for me.
All right, take care, Martin.
Okay, have a really good day. Good
Bye.
weekend.